To all my hustlers, dreamers, love dealers, I'm that kind of girl. Work hard, play hard, for my own heart, might just rule the world. I'm on fire, can you feel the heat? You can try to, but you can't stop me.
This is Marcy Burrows and Carol O'Savin hosting the Midlife Mavens podcast, where we chat candidly about sex, love, relationships, and life for women in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond. We're both psychologists who specialize in relationships and sexuality, but this isn't therapy. Thanks for joining us to discuss the ups and downs of life in the middle. We hope our conversations inspire and empower you.
A quick disclaimer. We're both psychologists who specialize in relationships and sexuality, but this isn't therapy. This podcast is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional services from a psychologist or other qualified mental health professional. The use of any products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Let's get into today's episode.
Today, we're going to talk about different relationship structures for women in midlife. And so whether it's deciding whether or not to stay in a long-term marriage, or if you find yourself just out of a long-term marriage or a relationship due to being widowed or divorced, or maybe being single long-term, we wanted to look at the decision to either stay single, to remarry, to cohabitate without marriage, and to look at all the pros and cons of all the different choices that are out there for women in midlife.
And I think that what I would add to that, Marcy, is just that there's no right answer here. There's no one right answer for anybody. Every single person going through this process has to decide what's going to work for them, for their particular relationship, for their particular extended family system, for their particular context. Somebody living in a really rural, conservative part of the country might make a different choice if they lived in a more liberal, less conservative part of the country. So just be aware that none of these things that we're talking about are absolutes, like you should do it this way or you should do it this other way. It's just what the options are and things to consider when you're making those decisions in your own life.
And one of the things we also wanted to add in is that we're talking mainly about monogamous relationships today. And we wanted to recognize that that also is not everybody's choice, that sometimes people do choose different types of ethical non-monogamy. And we do have a future episode planned to talk about monogamy versus non-monogamy. But we wanted to recognize that that's an option as well, even though it's not one that we're going to be including in our discussion today.
So where do you think we should start? You want to start with remarrying, staying single, cohabitating? The two of us have very different experiences of these things.
We do. So, I think that in some ways we can look at even going back and forth a little bit about what are the pros to remarrying versus what are the pros to staying single, or what are the pros to cohabitating. And so, there's a couple ways we could look at it.
Yeah. Well, as a woman who married in midlife, 54 when I got married, a lot of the reasons for that were, well, I'm in a lesbian relationship. So one thing was I kind of had to wait until it was legal for me to even get married in this state or in the country. So there was that piece of it. But a lot of the legal and medical benefits was a big piece of why we wanted to get married.
Yeah.
I was facing some surgery that, you never know what's going to happen in surgery. And I wanted to make sure that regardless of what happened, that my spouse was going to have the right to be present for me in those situations and be able to use benefits like Family Medical Leave Act and things that might not have been available to her if we hadn't been legally married. So for me, that was a huge factor moving us toward marriage. We had already been cohabitating for a number of years when we got married. So that part, it just felt like a natural extension. We already had the companionship and the support by having each other in our lives. We did share financial resources, and we still don't have, we haven't combined all of our finances. We each keep our own separate, but we have a shared financial account that we use. So we already had some of those benefits because we had been cohabitating for a while, but it was really the legal and medical stuff that moved us toward marriage as an institution.
I think that one of the things that leads people a lot of times to deciding to marry or remarry is, and this is going to be true for several of the structures, is that wanting companionship and emotional support. And I think that the choice to remarry kind of gives you that commitment in that relationship. And also, that's going to fit with cohabitating, or, one of the other structures we talked about is being in a committed partnership that you maintain different homes, but still considering each other life partners. And I think one of the things that draws people to that is that companionship piece. But the benefit of remarrying or marrying is that legal part that you talked about, and the protections that go along with that, being able to share benefits and medical decisions and stuff like that. That's unique to remarrying.
Right. I have some friends
Or
who
marrying.
had been cohabitating for decades and were in their 70s when they decided to get married not all that long ago. And I had the opportunity one time to ask why, after all those years of being together, they were already completely intertwined in their relationship. I was just curious what made them decide to get married, and it was the legal and medical stuff. As they were thinking more about moving toward the end of their lives, they realized that they wanted to have all of those protections in place so that if something were to happen, their partner had the opportunities to be present in ways that they wanted them to. And I think that's a big if we think about staying single as one of the options in midlife, that would be one of the cons, is you might not have somebody who has those rights in your life, who can intervene for you. I mean, you can give somebody medical power of attorney kind of things to give them the rights to do that. We often see people doing that with their children if they're single, but there's something about being single and not having that person with you all the time that I think feels more like a downside of singlehood versus marriage.
Yeah. And I think with cohabitating, you have that same issue to some extent, in terms of you would actually have to take that extra step of getting like a medical power of attorney type situation so that your partner could be there in medical situations. Similar to the story you just told, I have a friend of mine who, she and her now husband both had divorces, and they were both pretty messy divorces, and really weren't thinking that they wanted to remarry. And they were thinking, this is probably going to be a life partnership where we cohabitate. And my friend had some significant medical issues, and her partner had such a hard time with gaining access to her and being able to be there for her, that as soon as she was well enough and out, he said, I want to get married. And he proposed because of that situation.
Yeah. And for those in lesbian and gay relationships, we just won the right. That feels weird to have to say we had to win the right instead of being granted a natural civil right. But we only got the right to even get legally married in 2015. So it's been 10 years. And I know some very unfortunate stories about partners in gay or lesbian relationships who did not have the rights attributed to married couples, officially, legally married couples. And when their partner got sick and went into the hospital and then died, they were not able to be present. Family members who might not have been at all involved in the couple's life because of their disagreement with the choices that their family members were making suddenly were intrusive in keeping the partner who was not in the hospital away and making it impossible for them to support the person that they had committed their life to, but not in the eyes of their extended family members. And those, thankfully, given, at least for the time being, that we have the right to marry, hopefully those things become less common. But it was pretty common, especially back when you think about the AIDS epidemic of the 80s and early 90s.
And I think that brings up a really good point in terms of why people might want to choose marrying, especially in situations where there isn't a supportive family, whether it's in a gay relationship or even a straight relationship. If they're not supportive of the relationship for whatever reason, they don't like the partner, is that going to be a possibility that your partner's not going to be allowed access to you if you're sick or in the hospital and incapacitated, and the family members who are given legal rights to make those decisions aren't supportive of your relationship?
And we see that a lot in midlife with adult children. If the adult children aren't supportive of the parents, whether it's divorced or widowed parents' decision to engage in a new relationship, or they don't like the person, sometimes for valid reasons, sometimes not, out of their own place of hurt, then if the couple isn't married, if there isn't a legal document to support it, then they become the next of kin and can create issues when moving through end of life decisions and financial decisions, those kinds of things.
So, any other things about remarrying, like why people might choose to marry or remarry in midlife or choose not to? Well, one of the things I was talking about, my friends who had very difficult divorces and had a lot of trauma from their marriages, it is actually a place that you can work on, rebuild your trust. I know as a therapist, there's a whole lot of work that can be done in individual for working on relationships and attachment styles and things like that. But as a couples therapist, I often find that partners can be so valuable as partners in healing from past traumas and past relationship traumas. And so that is a piece that may not be as possible if somebody chooses to stay single. Now, that could still happen with cohabitating or with having a lifelong partnership or a committed partnership where you're not living together. But having a partnership can also be a healthy place to work on healing as well.
Right. If we think about our partner as our safe haven, secure space to live our messy lives in a healthy relationship, that can be a place to work through a lot of not just past relationship hurts from a messy divorce, even just from family stuff, old family of origin stuff
Yeah.
that might be coming up that makes relationship
Right.
challenges. So,
Yeah.
in the right relationship, it can be really healthy and healing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It kind of gives you that place to work on having more of a secure attachment to somebody in a healthier, different way. And also sometimes that's a reason to stay single for a while too, to have a chance to work on that before you start a new relationship, and then having that relationship be a place to kind of take the next step and continue working on now how do you form a healthier, different attachment.
I agree. One of the things that I work on with clients a lot is the benefit of, after a relationship ends, messy or not, being single for a while can be a place where you don't have the relationship stress to be able to sort through. I often will say, what are the lessons that you can learn from this relationship that you've just gotten out of that you can practice putting into place so that when you get into your next relationship, you don't have to go through these same kinds of dynamics again. You can have a better handle on it. I think the decision to stay single, even if it's just for a short period of time between relationships, can be beneficial for a lot of people. We wanted to briefly interrupt the episode today and remind you that Marcy and I are both psychologists and would be happy to consider working with you if it seemed like it would be helpful. If any of the content that we've talked about in any of our episodes brings up issues that you would like to explore with a psychologist, we want to make sure that you all have our contact information.
If you're interested in working with either one of us, we both offer 15-minute consultations to assess if it seems like would be a good fit for your therapeutic needs. You can go to my website, which is Marcy, M-A-R-C-I, Burroughs, B-U-R-R-O-U-G-H-S, P-H-D, C-S-T.com, or Carol's website, which is drosabin.com, DROSABEN.com. We also have our websites in the YouTube channel notes for this episode. And now back to our episode. I think another complication of marrying in midlife is blending families. Oftentimes there's children involved or adult children involved, and the complications of step parenting and co-parenting with exes, they could get really complicated.
I have seen it be so incredibly messy when it's young children or older adult children or even extended family members who don't like the decision to remarry. And co-parenting in those kinds of dynamics can create equal challenges and stressors to the relationship as well as to the family as a whole, as a unit.
My grandparents divorced, I think, before I was ever even born. But I remember throughout my life, their divorce was a big issue through my family. My grandfather's remarriage was a huge issue. I remember even at my wedding, so almost 30 years later, the who do you invite to the wedding was how can you have all three of them in the same space was huge. So yeah, that makes really complicated.
It can be really complicated, and it makes me think about one of the other issues that we wanted to talk about today, which is sometimes in midlife, we have to decide whether or not we want to stay married or not, or do something different in our relationships. And that has some of the same challenges that we've been talking about when we make the decision to stay single or remarry. An unhealthy relationship is really taxing on a person's well-being. It's difficult for the people in the unhealthy relationship. And maybe unhealthy is too strong, unsatisfying, a relationship that no longer works, maybe in the way that it did. It's difficult on the children. If there are children in that relationship or in that family, it's difficult for them. And so a lot of what I suspect you and I both see in our practices is women who have gotten to this place where they're struggling with the decision about whether or not they want to stay in this relationship and whether or not the challenges that they're facing in the relationship are things that can be resolved or worked through or are worth working through. It's why I often refer couples to you, because I'm seeing one of them and it becomes clear that they need couples work. And so that's how you and I stay connected, by you seeing some of my couples and vice versa. That's a tough decision as well, and creates a lot of shakeup for the family system.
Absolutely. I've seen a lot of clients, men and women, who are staying together for the kids and are planning on leaving once the youngest child graduates from high school. A lot of decisions are based on that. And actually, my dissertation was on children of divorce. And some of the research actually shows that in high conflict family, especially, kids are actually usually better off. But then I sometimes have a client who doesn't want to not be there in a protective kind of way for the child to have visitation with a parent that maybe isn't healthy in their eyes, if there's addiction, if there's any kind of emotional abuse, or certainly physical abuse, but that's a whole different ballgame. But yeah, so a lot of people that stay in marriages because of that, and it's a big factor on whether or not you leave.
On a similar note, I've heard from a smaller number of clients a decision to stay in a family, not so much for the children or stay in a marriage, a relationship, not so much for the children, but for the financial protections that that creates. And making a decision that even though both members of the couple know that this relationship isn't working and they don't want to be married, that getting divorced would be so financially challenging for both members of the couple that they choose not to do that. And whether or not they open up the relationship at that point to the marriage to other relationships is another issue we can talk about in our monogamy, non-monogamy episode. But that financial reasons are huge for so
Absolutely.
many of these decisions that we make about what we want our relationships to look like in our midlife.
And I've actually had multiple clients say to me when we're doing our initial consultation and we talk about fees, they'll say, well, that's a lot of money, but it's a whole lot cheaper than divorce. Like I've had multiple couples say that they're worried about the financial impact of getting divorced.
Huge.
Yeah.
Money is, what's the quote? Money is the root of all evil. And I think that might be true. And it might be the root of lots of challenges in relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually think too, I had my financial advisor actually told me though that you don't make emotional decisions for financial reasons. Like he has said that to me multiple times, that when it comes to where you live and who you're with, you don't do that for financial reasons, which
That's
kind of coming from the money guy is good
That's funny. My
advice.
financial planner says the same thing. She says to us all
Really?
the time, you make decisions about money based on emotions. I make decisions about money based on facts and figures and knowledge. And that's why it's helpful to have a financial planner, because I don't have the emotional investment that you have, either of you has, in whatever the decision is. So I can help you see some of that with a little bit more clarity. That must be a class that they take in financial
It must
planning
be, they
school.
must, yeah. I think that finances, though, it does end up being a big part of, do you cohabitate? Because sometimes it's a whole lot less expensive to live together than to maintain two homes. Really, that combination, though, too, children and finances and all of those factors, I think, come in throughout the different structures. Personally, I've been with my partner for 5.5 years, and we have chosen for the majority of our relationship, we're about to cohabitate, but up until recently, we decided not to do that because of kids, that it just made, our kids were ages that it didn't make sense to try to blend. Mine were so close to leaving, and he really wanted a lot of stability for his child. And so we decided to maintain separate homes for a while until we felt like we were in a place that it would make more sense to blend. So I think there's a whole lot of factors that across the structures that you may look at.
And those factors shift with time. As
Yes.
time goes on, children grow up, move away, maybe elderly parents die, and therefore worrying about what your elderly mother is going to think about your decision becomes less of an issue. So that's another good point that I hadn't thought about before, Marcy, that over time, lots of these factors that influence our decisions will shift and change. And I think it's really important to be aware of that and to be open to how you might change your mind, or a couple might change their mind about what's best for them based on the changes in those external factors in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like the two couples we talked about before that, after, my friend's medical experience and your friends who realized they were getting older and more likely to have medical issues, that's kind of an example of how things shifted, that you feel one way at one point in life. And then, so it's important to hold your opinions lightly about
Oh,
what.
I like that. That's nice. Hold your opinions lightly, like a bird in the
Yeah.
hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think maybe the last piece that we wanted to talk about here in this episode, at least, Marcy, was that one of the other decisions that folks might make in midlife, depending on all of the factors we've been talking about, is to have a committed relationship and not choose to cohabit.
Right.
I know a couple that never blended their homes. They were both single, they got married, and they just kept their separate homes. And they would go back and forth. They might spend
Yeah.
this weekend or this night together in this home or together in the other home or separate in their own homes. And having not all that recently, but in my recent experience, made the decision to cohabit and figuring out what to do with all this stuff in the limited space we have, there is something potentially beneficial about having a second house as a place to put some of the duplicates of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And having not cohabitated and being in a committed relationship for the last 5 years, I could definitely talk about the pros and cons that I've experienced over the last several years. I think that you do get the benefit of the companionship and emotional support and, that feeling of partnership. And, it's kind of nice sometimes to have your own space. It's harder to carve that out when you live together and to make sure that you have personal time and time with friends outside of the relationship. And that's a lot easier to do when you're not cohabitating. One of the things, and I've shared before, I have ADHD. So for me, throughout my whole life, packing is really difficult. And so inevitably, because I go back and forth or have gone back and forth so much, there's always like, the curling iron is not where I am, or the outfit I want to wear is not where I am. And so the executive functioning piece has always been a challenge for me. But but there's some pros as well. I mean, there's
Definitely pros and cons on all of these issues that we're talking about. And I think, did we say that I at the beginning about there's no absolute one right way to do this? Everybody has to make their own decisions.
yeah.
One of my clients is in a committed relationship that she's been in for a while. And one of the issues that has been coming up lately is frustration that the expectation seems to have become established that she's the one who moves. She's the one who always goes to his house, like for the weekends. During the week, she might be at her own house and he's at his house, but then on the weekends, she has to come to his house. And that you prompted me to think about that because you said you're the one primarily going to your partner's house, and I understand why that is for you, that the factor of children doesn't exist for this client that I'm talking about. And so it's become, a few weeks ago in a session, she was like, I'm going to tell him he has to come here this weekend. She got really adamant about it because it is exhausting to be the one who's constantly having to think where your stuff is that you're going to need for whatever period of time.
Yeah. And I think one other piece that we haven't talked about in all of this, we really haven't talked very much about societal views, a little bit about like how families blend together. But I think there's a piece of, and going back to some of the Gottman work that I do, Gottmans look at symbols as a really important part of any relationship, of a satisfying relationship, having shared symbols. And so one of the things that I frequently will work with my couples on is when there's a mismatch in symbols, and whether or not you get married is one of those places where that frequently happens, that marriage symbolizes different things for one partner than the other partner. And then in terms of extended family relationships, it could symbol something different for your parents than it does for you, which could put pressure on you to go one way or the other, or it can mean something different to your adult children than it does for you. I think I told you an example earlier today, Carol, of a friend of mine who was cohabitating, and her daughter was insistent that even though this was someone that my friend considered a life partner, that they were not going to call her partner granddad when they had kids. And that was really upsetting to my friend because in her mind, this person's her life partner. But her daughter had a very different view of what marriage symbolized. And so I think that not only can it be an issue between the couple, but it can also be an issue with extended family relationships and even what you call your right now. My sister is not technically my partner's sister-in-law, although she would say that he's her brother-in-law because that's how she views it. And that's, she is open to seeing marriage not having to be a piece of that relationship, but there could be situations where that's more complicated, and it changes how your partner's viewed in your family, or your family views your partner.
One of the things that I think can be really challenging is figuring out how to hold your boundaries around some of those things. Knowing what's best for you, best for your relationship, without letting the family have too much undue influence, especially if the relationship is relatively new or young. I think it can be challenging for the people, the individuals, to not feel a need to try to people please everybody, which can be really hard in these kinds of situations. And one of my areas of work is with family estrangement, and particularly adult daughters and their older moms, and estrangement in those kinds of relationships. And these are the kinds of things that contribute to estrangement. If the mother or the daughter, because it happens on both sides, gets real adamant about it has to be this particular way and oversteps their boundaries with their parent or their child in that situation, can make it hard for the other partner in the relationship to be like, ooh, yeah, let's go spend the holiday with your family. That sounds like a lot of fun. If they know that the parent or the daughter is, the mother or the daughter are not supportive of the relationship. So that can be an unfortunate consequence of not being able to find a place of agreement in these kinds of situations.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a consequence of when people don't hold their opinions lightly.
Exactly. Perfect example. Yes. Yes. I think we're close to the end of our time. Marcy, was there anything that we haven't thought about or haven't talked about that we wanted to mention?
Loss of autonomy after years of independence. That's an important one too, that it could be challenging after being independent and single for a long time to kind of change
Figure
that.
out how to merge. Loss of autonomy is kind of huge, whether that includes finances or just decisions about the furniture you're going to keep or not keep.
Yeah.
I feel like we've done a pretty decent job of covering all that.
Yeah, I think so. And as we said before, we're going to talk a little bit more about when people choose to open up their relationships or if they don't as well in a separate episode. And yeah.
One of the things that I would want to add, and I would say this across all of our episodes and maybe just in general for all of the midlife mavens out there, that again, there's no kind of you have to do it this way or you have to do it that way. I think what's critical across our lifespan, but I'm going to say particularly at this stage of our lives, is that we're being intentional about the decisions that we're making. And I think that's one of our goals with the podcast, is that we can bring up some of these issues that maybe people haven't thought about before and haven't had an opportunity to consider, and therefore might not be as intentional as they move through this phase of life as they would be after having some opportunity to hear a discussion about it. So that's the hope, is not that you do it a certain way, but that you do whatever you do it with thought and intention and consideration of yourself and the other people in your life.
Well, thanks for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you in future episodes as we make midlife your best life.
Thanks for being here. We'll see you next time. This has been Marcy Burrows and Carol O'Sabin with the Midlife Mavens podcast. As psychologists, we are big advocates for therapy. If anything in today's conversation left you feeling like there's more that you would like to explore, we encourage you to pursue therapy. In today's episode notes, we've listed links for several directories you could use to find a therapist who's a good fit for you. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you in a future episode. Be sure to visit our Midlife Mavens Facebook page to share your ideas about future conversations.